This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. So today we're going to do a deep dive into something we've been touching on for about the last year, and that's after conversations with some distros, LGSs, etc., a deep dive on how COVID has actually impacted print runs based on feedback from wholesalers. So this is like, a little bit of a general timeline, when the set releases, when the print run happens, and how it's going to affect reprints and what that means for the prices of these sets. Because, print runs are insane right now, so harboring sealed product for years isn't always the best idea. And we're going to take a look at if maybe some of these sets are a good idea to just sit on sealed product for a little bit if it is a bit more of a sensible investment than it was, 2 years ago when we were in return to Ravnica. So without further ado, let's get started.
Yeah, so we weren't really sure how the lockdown would actually affect the printing of cards because the Carta is in Texas, correct?
One of them, yeah.
One of the Carta plants is in Texas. So Texas was kind of always in an area of flux in regards to lockdown. And eventually they did. So that's going to impact immediately the ability for WotC to get their standard print runs out to the gaming populace. And it doesn't affect all sets. It really just kind of starts at a specific point in time. And we're really starting to look at this with Ikoria. Ikoria starts printing basically at the end of 2019. It releases in April of 2020. That's about a 6-month lead time to really start printing. So they get, maybe 3 or 4 months lead time, which means they're able to do their first wave based on distro and allocation. They might be able to get a second wave in based on interest. And now this is where things kind of get interesting because we go into lockdown for the most part in the United States a month-ish, a couple weeks before the release of Ikoria. So this is the last set that really sees this great demand for paper product, and we kind of see things start to fluctuate in regards to overall numbers and not a stagnation of quantity of cards in market or prices, but a desire for a lot of the tournament staples as a whole. There's a lot more copies of these cards floating around right now than one would expect if people are ready to get back into paper. And so the idea that kind of sparked this cast is something that I've been heard actually, and a number of other Magic-related podcasts that are not related to finance but play. And LSV has mentioned this in either a constructed resources or a limited resources, and I believe Jarvis, you also mentioned it as well, that once people are ready to return to play, they're going to look to pick up these cards in paper, and they're going to need a lot of this kind of back catalog of cards. And starting with Ikoria, we start to lose out on these print waves. So when people come back and they look for what are currently like low to mid-range price staples like Luris and Sharknado from Ikoria, the prices that we have now on all versions, but I'm mainly going to focus on the set regular and full art, non-foil for both, are basically set to explode. Because by the time we're able to get back into paper play, we're basically going to have passed the window for a full third and fourth printing of Ikoria. And something interesting with Ikoria that we noted is that it basically fought with Commander 2020 for printing. And whether or not we even got a full second wave of either of those is kind of TBD. It's not something we really have great insight into because that second wave of printing happened at the beginning of 2020 in Q1. And so Ikoria was really the set we wanted to start with and discuss because this is the one that is like the most impacted, but in an awkward fashion because it got like unabated printing for at least the first wave and then like hard stop.
And it's interesting too because it's one of those sets where the print run was somewhat due to how they restructured the releases of sets and how new products hit. all of a sudden you have what used to be a normal print run cannibalized by multiple products that aren't necessarily the same set, that are using the same amount of resources. When you combine with, obviously COVID and everything, it's a little bit of a change. After that, you had a very short turnaround to Core 21, which was another thing, because this is kind of like where you see the start of this is going to be here. It's not going to be with Throne, because we got a full supply of Throne. So we wanted to start at basically what was the Guinness of all of this, and try to look through the timeline of here's the sets, here's where they came out, here's where they were impacted, here's what they can do. And part of that is obviously taking a look at when they rotate. So as my lovely co-host said, we're looking at the end of next year for rotation on Ikoria and Core 21. Personally, these are not sets that I would look to stock up on because of the print run, because they kind of got a full print run. Obviously, we don't know for sure because Wizards isn't exactly transparent about any of that stuff, which is their prerogative. So I'd err more on the side of caution with one like this, because not only do we have, potentially a full print run, we've got it rotating sooner than later, which to me means there's people may not go as deep on these cards depending when we have paper events again. I've heard some vendors that, talk to some of the higher ups at Channel. I've heard from some people at, whatever TO organizations, pastimes, whatever. They're like, maybe Q3. Well, Q3 is late enough that people may just not care about Core 21 or Ikoria.
Yeah.
So for me, I'd be a little bit more cautious. Yeah, I'll buy 5 cards for my deck and then just deal with not paying the money for 2 months when they rotate.
Looking at Core 21 and Ikoria especially, it's kind of interesting to see, you have multiple variants of these cards, right? Ikoria being the standout one because it has the Godzilla stuff, and that really muddies the waters. So if you're going to do something like look at Dawn Glare for this, which I've got pulled up, but is a mess to show even in video. The first, 3, 6, 8 or so cards are all Godzilla variants until you get to full art Luris and full art Shark Typhoon. Then it's more Godzilla stuff. And to really get into the meat of the set and find cards that are worth anything, you basically fall down to $9, and that's when you see Ketria Triome, which is the Teamer Triome, Luris, and Fiend Artisan, the Ozolith. Everything else more expensive is basically a full art or Godzilla version of this card. So holding regular boxes of this set is a little more of a bitter pill to swallow than it would be normally, because so much of this value is tied up in the Godzilla prints and the full art stuff, and the chance to open them while they're in a regular set or draft booster is much lower than if you were holding collector booster boxes, CBBs. I think if you had a CBB of this set, Core 21, I'd be fine sitting on those because of, Core 21 did CBBs. I'd be fine with that because of the intrinsic value in the dedicated full arts and alt arts that you're going to get. But holding regular set boxes of these to me is a little more unsavory than it usually is for somebody who would want to flip sealed. I mentioned the demand for a lot of these cards. Ikoria does kind of fall flat. Outside of tournament staples, there's not a lot. Mutate was kind of a miss for EDH. And when you look at it, there's one card with Mutate that hits, and it's, I think it's the Sultai Mutate card because you can replay it from your graveyard.
Yeah.
And that's about it. If you check EDH Rec for the set, it's really not that popular for EDH Rec. Triomes,
the lands?
Yeah, exactly, right? But any set that does unique lands that are kind of tournament staples, they're going to fall into EDH, right? So I like bucketing those separately. People aren't just going to crack packs for the Triomes, I don't think, for EDH. And like I said, after that, the value just kind of tanks. Some of the ultimatums here and there, like Genesis is a tournament staple right now, as well as, is it Emergent is the Sultai one? Yeah, and just regular printing. I don't think there's going to be a lot of value to these boxes long term as people try and chase the 3 companions that are being played in EDH. That said, if you're able to buy into this stuff cheaply as singles in the full art non-foil, I think that is a lot more savory in the long term because of the inevitable just short on product overall. And this is one of the times where if you have the space to dedicate to sealed, unless you have the CBBs, I would push against sealed and push for these singles that are seeing EDH play as the full art versions or the Godzilla versions, because they have the intrinsic value already. They're going to hold. You don't have to worry about it.
In stark contrast to that, for me, I think the supplementals are an incredibly good hold, specifically Jumpstart and Double Masters. Jumpstart's a little bit different for me because, obviously was July, I think, that it came out.
Yeah.
The print run, assuming the 6-month lead up, which again, this is assuming standard lead ups because we don't know how things were impacted by COVID in terms of the production windows.
Yes. Yep.
There was a supply issue with the first wave. So that already, you had Allosaurus Rider out of the gate fetching $50+ just because supply was so short. We had Double Masters released the next month, and they said, hey, we're printing Double Masters, so Jumpstart's reprint is going to be delayed. We'll get to it eventually, but it's delayed. On top of the production or storage issues that you had for Jumpstart, and then the delay due to Double Masters, a sizable portion of that print run was misprinted, which adds extra value to it. I'm sure if any of you are in any of the misprint groups on Facebook, you've seen the proxy dual lands that are literally just like a mountain printed on top of a swamp. Like it says swamp and there's a red mana symbol in the background of the swamp symbol. And there's entire decks that are double, triple printed. And I think in terms of, a reasonable investment, if you can get it at your LGS still and hold on to, Jumpstart's one I would do because we did get a second reprint, but it was much smaller than I think we'd originally anticipated because it didn't hit until around Zendikar Rising or Commander Legends, at which point they're going to print those sets because they're trying to sell them.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I like Jumpstart overall right now. We kept touting for a while that we would get this other reprint, that we would get it. And eventually we did get it. Like you mentioned, it's smaller, but we have not received the quantity reprint that you and I thought that we would get of this set. And as you mentioned, if you can get it or you have it, I think it is a safe hold at this point. I don't know the life cycle of a supplemental product in regards to printing, but if it started printing...
Supposedly, Mero said it's at will, but we have multiple supplemental sets since, so I think even being at will, we may be past the window for Jumpstart. Just my personal opinion, not reflecting...
No, I think the closer we get to Modern Horizons, the more damning it is that we get that we're not going to get another Jumpstart printing, and these cards are just going to continue to tick up. So if you have the ability to hold, I think you just hold until the end of time.
Yeah.
The top 4 cards in the set: Allosaurus Rider, Crater Huff, Behemoth, Tiny Bones, Bruvac. And Bruvac was a card that you and I both mused about earlier in the cast as being a great card to pick up for EDH once we got the other reprint. And then you hold. But here we are, no second reprint, right?
Yeah.
We just got wasted. Double Masters to me is a little more interesting than Jumpstart overall because there's this weird... set of stats with the set, and it doesn't have to do with the fact that you could literally dumpster dive for UPCs on the CE boxes and mail in the WotC and get free packs, but it kind of does because the non-foil box toppers are rarer than the foil box toppers. And so if you have the ability to keep product with that or buy into singles like on the cheap before we get back into paper, Stoneforge Mystics, you just got hoisted with Thoughtseize, but there's some other tournament staples in the box toppers that you can get in on. Like I would move on that as well. I think that's a fine hold. I don't see Double Masters really coming back with another wave. What's out there is out there because, like I said, the closer we get to Modern Horizons 2, the more they're going to have to shift gears to print that set to infinity and beyond.
And the interesting thing about Double Masters for me was that, when it first came out, we were both like, oh, look at that. We've got the Ravenous Trap slot. How great would that feel?
Yeah.
And you had a lot of this value that was tied up in lower end cards. And it's actually, due to the production issues, possibly, has had its recovery time shortened compared to other Masters sets. Even with the free redemptions and everything else, typically your master sets, you see like a 3 to 5 month turnaround before the prices start recovering.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw it with Jumpstart as well. Both of these sets, the singles recovered very quickly from peak open, which obviously was not a whole lot because we didn't have drafting going on at the time.
Yeah.
But I think that, again, those supplemental sets are really good for that reason. The one thing to watch out for, and this is true of pretty much every set we're going to talk about, is obviously foils are a little bit different except for Ikoria in Core 21, because this is the point where the foil quality dipped drastically. So it's not necessarily something where, if I had a bunch of cards sitting around from these sets single-wise, I'd get rid of the foils before the non-foils.
Yep.
But in terms of sealed, I'd be sitting, like you said, on Jumpstart and Double Masters effectively till the end of time. Like when I'm like, I could use the money, I guess I'll sell it type of deal. It's not something I'd be in a hurry to flip. I'd be fine sitting on these.
Yeah. Absolutely. Double Masters released in August of 2020. We've got 5-ish months until we come up on the anniversary of that. So again, we're heading towards the end of the life cycle of this product naturally anyway, especially as a supplemental. So it's doubtful that we're going to get much more over time. Whatever WotC is sitting on will eventually get out there, but it's doubtful that, because they had to do all the UPC redemptions, but it's doubtful that we get another full print wave, be it a third or a fourth print wave for this product. And after Double Masters, that really brings us to the standard sets that have been impacted by COVID and print run shrinkage because of personnel shrinkage. Zendikar Rising releases in September of 2020, so that means printing started in Q2, April. That's impacted. This set is legal until Q4 2022, and right now we are past the second wave of print runs, I think heading into the third in regards to life cycle. So we're probably, for the life of this product, going to be in a world where every print run of Zendikar Rising is going to be affected by COVID delays.
And this was one of the first sets that came out where everyone, all the distros were like, look, you're getting your full allocation. You'll get your normal allocation. That's what we're being told.
Yep.
And then the allocations were halved or less because that was just the reality of the situation. So this is, especially with Zendikar Rising being one of those first sets that was heavily impacted by it, it's going to be probably the most impacted by it because there's not a portion of the window that's sizable that's outside of any type of production issue that isn't also impacted by other standard sets, like your Kaldheims, your Strixhavens, your Dungeons and Dragons, your Twilight set, whatever. And similar to the other sets, the further we get along that timeline, the more that I would expect WotC to say, all right, well, we're going to push the new thing. We've got the shiny new toy. Let's push out a whole bunch of Harry Potter.
Yep.
Let's push out a whole bunch of D&D. Let's push out a whole bunch of Twilight, and kind of leave Zendikar Rising on the back burner. And the really interesting thing about that, and you and I were talking about this before we started recording, was looking at the full arts out of that set. Not masterpieces, but they're masterpieces. And the fact that Zendikar Rising had kind of this unique space that it occupied there because the full arts weren't necessarily like shticky like the Ikoria ones were, which were the comic art. These were like a more iconic format of that. And with the insertion that they had, I think that adds a lot more value to it because, when I've touched on this in my picks in the past, I like the low end, like incremental, flash factor that some of these cards have. And for me, Zendikar is probably the one standard set that I would be comfortable holding because of that.
I think so too, and for me, a lot of it has to do with two factors. One, if you want to play in paper, and then you can just wait out the rotation of Ikoria and Core 2021 before you start playing again in paper. So this is the first set you're going to look at. Two, this is the first set with the modal double face cards, and every one of the mythics is constructed playable, which means people are going to be chasing these. Yeah. And right now, every card that costs about $5 or more is a tournament staple, aside from Forsaken Monument, or has been a tournament staple. Oh, and Ashaya. Everything else. Everything
Sure.
else on this list, right? So this is a set that has immediate tournament play, so once we open up in paper, people are going to be clamoring for this set, and that will continue until 2021. So your turnaround time, if you're holding sealed or you can get in on the cheap, is actually a lot shorter than your standard window. And if I had the ability to hold sealed and look into the future when this set came out, then yeah, I probably would have bought a case or two of this set to sit on for when we come back into paper and I can start moving boxes. Because by the time we come out of this, like I said, we have about a year left, so that's kind of third and fourth print wave ish, and third and fourth print wave, not the largest print waves overall.
No. That's, historically where you get your third and fourth combined are usually about the size of the second based on allocations and what you can get, which is about the size of the first. So it's much smaller, and that's granted return to Ravnica print runs.
Yeah.
Because the other thing, worth touching on is we don't know if, on top of the COVID production, like, we touched on when we were talking about Ikoria, some of this could just be the new norm because of the amount of products that are coming out. Prime example being Jumpstart and Double Masters being released in back-to-back months, where you've just got overloaded production. And unless we see Carta like open up a new factory or something, this could just be, granted a little bit stricter, but this could be the reality for print runs from now on.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the reality you and I expect to live in. We don't expect Carta to keep the lights on 24 hours a day to meet pre-COVID demand for sets like Zendikar, things that are going to last past Q4 2021, So we're setting our expectations based on the reality that we expect, because while WotC is attempting, is it Hasbro or WotC that wants to do this now, or Hasbro on behalf of WotC, where they want to basically break out the logistics and almost make WotC finally in control of its own destiny in regards to shipping direct to Amazon.
Hasbro is
the distro out of it,
shipping WotC off. So I think they're like similar to when the Hasbro former exec took over as CEO. This is your new direction, but you're independent.
Yeah,
but this is what you're going to do.
Yeah, it's something we talked about, though. WotC can ball up now, and they can finally take over logistics, which they never did. They let another entity handle that, and in this instance, logistics actually means just the shipping and storage of their product, meaning everything WotC makes as a company. They store it in their own warehouse, and then it's shipped to either Amazon or distribution through another entity to be housed there and resold. And something that was happening outside of the earners call that just happened in the last couple of weeks was, I believe we read something about a change in the logistics chain where WotC was going to almost sidestep distributors and look to go direct to both Amazon and or players.
Yeah.
And so
it's interesting to see too, because you've got that logistics happening when they're spinning WotC off on its own thing, when they've totally changed the model of how WotC works and releases products, and you've got COVID on top of it. And as an aside, I am interested to see what changes back, if anything, after this happens.
Yeah, the purpose of the tangent was that, while WotC might be balling up to finally control their own destiny in regards to logistics, I really don't think they're going to ball up until Carta to turn the factories on 24/7.
No way.
I don't think they're going to do that, or ask Carta to spin up a third facility to meet these print run demands. I don't think that's going to happen. WotC is definitely stepping out onto their own and doing some things to benefit their company and the players of the game on the whole, but I do not think that is going to be one of them.
Yeah.
So Zendikar to me represents a great hold for the short term, because I think it's going to be an easy flip overall. And it being the first impacted set that we're really looking at, this product is underserved. It will remain underserved until they decide to do something about it. And as you mentioned, with the D&D set coming up and the Harry Potter inspired set coming up, it's doubtful that they decide to turn Omnoth.set back on at the print offices when they can just milk the D&D and the Harry Potter product or IPs to the end of time.
Yeah.
From Zendikar Rising, 2 months later, we have the Commander Legends release. So we're basically looking at Zendikar Rising and Commander Legends in print at the same time. And Commander Legends is an immediately impacted set, but it seems like the demand for Commander Legends isn't as great as Jumpstart, isn't as great as Double Master, so prices on that set and quantity overall is fairly light. It's pretty easy to go out and pick up cards. You're able to spec on that set for a while. There's some really interesting storage options when it comes to Commander Legends, and if you want to open foils that retain their shape, I am pretty sure this is a humidity issue, so you either need to live in an environment that is decently humid, build a humidor, or have a dehumidifier, and you can flatten out that set, or you can chance it and open cans of Pringles all day long.
Yeah.
To me, Commander Legends is a very dicey hold at any point, because even at the initial storage location, it was immediately impacted.
Yeah. I don't know that I don't want to hold sealed for sure. And I really don't want to hold singles either. The only singles have been the CEDH staples, your Tana Timna type stuff.
Yep.
That got etched foils. But other than that, I've been avoiding it, because this is something that, they've already said the Time Spiral print run is going to be incredibly limited.
Yeah.
I would think that if we were to get a supplemental reprint of anything over the last year, Commander Legends is the one that is most likely to happen. If all of a sudden some just gets found in a warehouse after they stop production, that's going to be the set that it happens to. It's a lowest common denominator, appeal to the broadest audience. Yep. The storage issues are bad, and it kind of suffers from the Ikoria problem, where you have a million variations of every card. So it's artificially suppresses prices because there are so many versions of everything.
Yep. I don't think Commander Legends sealed is anywhere where I want to be for any reason, but I'm fine with singles because they are eminently movable. Like I said, if you have foils and you're able to effectively create your own humidor or your own humidifier, there are ways to do that. If you don't want to buy one, then by all means move in on that. Otherwise, I like the etch stuff.
Yep.
Non-foil. And it's a great set to just look at overall. I'm going to be putting out in our Patreon Discord in the next couple of days just this EDH document I've been working on. Just I've mentioned it before, just consuming videos and writing down cards that seem like they're underserved in EDH overall, that actually beat or met or exceeded expectations in games. And there's a lot of stuff from Commander Legends that seems to be overlooked that is incredibly impactful in games. And I'm constantly surprised how well designed that set was for Commander and how impactful it became on such a broad format.
Yeah, it's something that has a lot of upside, and I recognize that, and there's a lot of opportunity there, but for me, it really is all about the storage. Yeah. I'm not saying, necessarily listen to me, obviously, because whatever, but that's my trepidation with it, is specifically Commander Legends seems to be the one set where it came out, and that's when everything started hitting the fan about, these are awful quality cards. I'm pulling them straight out of a booster, and they're already curled into Pringles. It's impacting not just the foils, but the regular cards and everything else. And that's kind of where I'm like, all right, well, if that's the case, I'm just going to step back a little bit. I don't really want to touch this stuff as much.
Yep. Absolutely agreed. And from Commander Legends, we have where we are now, Call Time and Time Spiral both released in March of 2021. That means their print run started in Q4 2020. Still in serious lockdown. They're going to be Call Time is legal and standard until Q4 2022. Time Spiral is a supplemental set, so a year lifespan at print, and that means that the reprint on both of these sets will be immediately impacted. Time Spiral, I think, is probably going to be just as bad as Jumpstart and Double Masters, where we
I
got
think so,
we
yeah.
got what we got, and we're heading right into the D&D set. No slowdown, no stopping, and from there it's just all aboard to Harry Potter and Modern Horizons. And I don't think Time Spiral really sees any kind of reprint. Call Time, I think, is better off than Zendikar Rising overall in regards to I'm going to use the term reprint equity, but it's not really applicable here. It does have the ability to see a larger reprint run because Texas has opened up recently, which means that Carta might be able to actually get back to capacity staff, and that has an immediate effect on print run for Call Time. In regards to holding either set, I don't think I'd like to hold Call Time that much. It's a fun set. Like, there's some great individual cards in there. It seems to be decently impactful at the tournament level. What happens when they fix the interaction with Valky and the Sultai Ultimatum, kind of TBD, but after that leaves a little bit of a power vacuum outside of Vorinclex.
Yeah.
Time Spiral, I'm kind of iffy on if I even want to buy a box.
My stance on Time Spiral is kind of unique, I think. So I am fine holding this if I can get it for below retail. The other interesting thing is that this is already up on FBA through Wizards of the Coast at 181.75. So we have a floor of 181 on this. At 181, this is probably a Modern Masters level hold, where you'll hit your critical mass at about 8 to 12 months, I'd expect, where, all right, we've plateaued. This is our price unless we want to hold for an unreasonable amount of time. The other thing, like we touched on in our last episode when we were talking about Time Spiral Remastered, was we don't know if this type of remasters set is going to be the norm now. And if it is, I'm less comfortable holding on to Time Spiral Remastered. I'm less comfortable holding on to Modern Masters or Modern Horizons because we're getting Modern Horizons 2.
Yep.
Knowing that it is something that is going to be an every year or every other year, that this is a series of sets. Because a lot of the value, I think, in Time Spiral Sealed outside of the cards is obviously the possibility of opening, a $3,000 foil. And the more that we get those foils introduced, the more likely we can see a reprint of Thoughtseize with the old frame, with the same art, that all of a sudden affects the price of original Time Spiral Remastered reprint. Mm-hmm. And that's, there's pros and cons to that. Personally, I'm probably a little bit more greedy because I would hold it if I can get it for below retail, but I wouldn't hold more than a case. I'm not going to, sit on it like I would in Ultimate Masters where you have like 6 cases or something, and like, oh, I'll get rid of them someday.
Yep.
Because additionally, Ultimate Masters had the problem where the sealed prices tanked for a little bit because nobody wanted the cards. We're not going to get that with Time Spiral Remastered. I fully expect within 3 months of release, it's going to be $300 to $400 a box. I don't want to pay that.
No.
Ever. For in-print whatever product.
Yep.
Not to mention reprint window. Because in terms of set releases, as far as supplementals go, we've got Modern Horizons 2, and that's it scheduled for the year, right?
Correct. Modern Horizons 2 doesn't represent the last thing scheduled for the year. There's some more after that. What do we have? Innistrad, that's it.
Oh, yeah. But, sorry, as far as, like, the supplemental type stuff goes.
Oh, yeah.
We've got this and Modern Horizons 2.
Yep.
So we may get a reprint. I don't really think so. But it's something that I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable holding on to. I would say probably stay away from it. It's a bad call on my part. I'll own that. But, whatever.
I think out of all the sets we've touched on in regards to hold, this is the one that probably offers the most unique strategy because you can either hold the sealed product and play the old border lottery like you could with the expedition sets because you're going to get an old border card in there, and obviously some of them command more of a price than the others, but the other 14 cards in the pack, short of Tarmogoyf and maybe a choice few others, aren't really worth the rest of the price of that pack. So you're basically looking at that extra slot for your value. And if you want to hold the box and kind of own that premium, I think that's perfectly fine. The other way to do it would just be to buy in at peak supply and just target singles at peak supply. People have been fawning over Thoughtseize for a while. There's now a full set that's been opened in non-foil, and they look really good. We know what Chalice and the Lotus Bloom look like. We know what Cranial Plating looks like. And I think if you are looking for an opportunity to move higher quantity overall, I think singles is the way to go, because you'll be able to churn those a lot easier than you're going to be able to churn one full box in time, because it'll be easier to find somebody who wants 4 Thoughtseizes than somebody who wants an entire box when it costs $300-$400. The people who want that Thoughtseize want that Thoughtseize. They're in that market, and they're not that difficult to find. You got Jundal format guy all over the place, or Grixis Delver guy.
Roland, yeah,
and both of those players can play their entire deck in Old Border now. That's actually really important to remember when you look at this set and the cards they chose. They chose with a purpose. A lot of decks in Modern and Legacy now can be played entirely in Old Border. And I think that is going to lean, that kind of pressure is going to lean on the set and increase the price of boxes over time and make singles easy to churn and an easy way to make profit as well. And you just need to determine what's better for you, your storage space, your wallet, and your timelines. And like I said, comparatively to the rest of the sets, I think this Time Spiral in particular is a lot more interesting to look at than the rest of them right now.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. So and again, it's like you said, there's multiple strategies. You can target the singles, you can target the sealed and play the lottery. People love to play the lottery.
Yep.
People love to play the people playing the lottery.
Yes.
So there's options there.
And there are people that think this draft set, before they even got their hands on it, looked amazing. So eventually you'll probably be able to capitalize on that too. People who just want to go back and with their play group crack this box for a draft, and they'll be out there. There's extra strategies for all this stuff. You just need to choose which one you want to pick. And I think, like I said, Time Spiral is going to be the most interesting one until we get to Modern Horizons and we start seeing spoilers for that. I think that one might also prove some of the more interesting exit strategies in regards to everything we've looked at that had a print run affected by COVID by the time we get there. But until then, Time Spiral's interesting. Me myself, like I said, I don't want to hold the box because I don't want to deal with the lottery. I'd rather pick up the singles that I want. I'm not actually going to look to make any kind of profit off Time Spiral. I'm literally just going to finish up a handful of Legacy and Vintage decks in Old Border Japanese, because why not own Storm and Dredge and stuff like that
in Old Border Japanese.
Yep, exactly. My English Pass and Flames is neat, but my Japanese one will be better.
That's true.
Personal opinion, not facts.
No, it's facts.
I mean, look, if it casts every spell twice, it'd obviously be better.
Yeah. Well,
can't all be that.
No, unfortunately.
All right, you ready for your pick?
Yes.
All right, take it away.
So, in following with the reserved list memery, kind of an interesting one. Spirit of the Night. So there's a few things about this card that I like from a design perspective. First off, it's one of the few cards that has protection from its own color. It's also one of only 2 cards in all of Magic that you can tribute summon, a la Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is great.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is that with all of this reserve list fuckery going on, taking a look at the stocks graph, this is one of the only cards where this is the case. So if you look at the market price, you'll see that it spikes about July this year, starts going on a steady upward trend. And then, or last year, sorry, and then January spikes to where we're at now, which is about $14-ish. The interesting thing is that the low for listings does not change. We are basically at about where we were, sitting at currently 370-ish, according to MTG stocks. And the stock has been sitting steadily at between 75 to 125 for quite some time. So we've got LP copies for as low as $7 right now, which is half of market. The interesting thing about this is being in the position like this is something that has a lot of manipulation going on in the price to influence the stocks graph, but not necessarily the sales to back it up. which to me says there's an opportunity here to exploit for profit in some way. This is something that is a legend, so it has a little bit of EDH viability. I also love the art, which has nothing to do with the price of the card, but as an aside, seriously, look at the art on this card. It's great.
It is amazing.
So I'd be looking at, honestly, this is something that we've seen the first reserve list spike on. Because the other thing is, if you look at the market history on this card, going back to 2018, it doesn't really spike before this year. So this is another one of those opportunities similar to Emberwild Caliph, where we're seeing this happen for the first time. So you can get in on the downturn, which is basically now, because still sitting pretty at about a $7 to $8 LP low is a fine investment price. Granted that you're going to hold on to this until the next reserve list spike, when buy lists hit $10 to $15 on this card, when we spike again after this valley. Because so far we haven't seen a floor reset. Worst case scenario, you get in now at $7, it's not going down, because it is a little bit pricier than Emberwild, obviously. It's also a real card that has real abilities.
Yes.
Unlike Emberwild Caliph, which is garbage.
I mean, to be fair, one of its abilities is fake because it's like half first strike.
Yeah, first strike when attacking. Okay, sure. But I think that this is one of the cards that, similar to Emberwild Caliph, has a little bit of an opportunity on the next reserve list spike. Unlike Emberwild Caliph, I think this is a real card with long-term potential outside of reserve list spikes. I don't think it's the type of thing that's ever going to be worth $50. You're not going to play it in every EDH deck with black. You're probably not going to make it as a general unless you really love the art, which I love the art, but I'm not going to make it as a general because that's just some really casual stuff, and that's not for me. But I think that you're looking at probably in the fall, when we hit another reserve list bump, like we historically do that time of year, at around a $10 to $15 buy list on this once copies start drying up. The interesting thing about this as well is that this is one of the few cards that I found on the reserve list that is like not real necessarily. It's not your mode. It's not your Chains of Mephistopheles, where the price is similar on MKM after conversion as it is to TCG Player, which means that this isn't the type of thing that's easily going to be arbitraged to counter any sort of pricing issue. Because there's times where, early on in the Mox Diamond spike, we saw Mox Diamond for about 100 euros less in Europe, so you could just arbitrage some over and make money. That opportunity does not exist with this card. So it's something that's a little more feasible for me to see it go up long term, because you don't have that opportunity to easily fix the price if it starts to correct.
Yep. Now, Spirit of the Night is an interesting card. I have seen this card in binders. I think I can count on a number of times. One hand. I have been successful in trading for it exactly 0 times.
Yep.
Because I've loved this art. I've loved this card. And it's something I forget about all the time. And I think that's really kind of what this is. It doesn't seem to exist on vendor sites overall.
No.
Card Kingdom has one. Channel Fireball site doesn't want to load anything. They have one as well. So it really is extracting this card from the free market to kind of make hay.
Yeah.
And then just run it back in. I don't even know if Card Kingdom's buying. I can take a look real quick. But this is just something that floats along but is pseudo-real because, like you said, it is eminently useful.
Yeah.
It does something without serious drawback either for a card like this of its era. CK is buying 24 at $7 a piece. There's almost immediate arbitrage opportunity, 9-10 in credit. You can almost just push TCG Player quantity of LP plus to Card Kingdom right now for an immediate out on this card. For what it's worth, Tribute Summoning, as you said, means sacrificing creatures. Urborg Panther and Breath Stealer, also drawn by Cliff Nielsen. They look just as weird as
it's great. I love
Spirit
it.
of the Night. Yeah. And it's not an art evocative card, not so much, so it just kind of floats on by. And I think this is one of those things where I'm fine sitting on for a while. You just stock it and forget it. and eventually you'll make your out. The price discrepancy that you brought up, or lack thereof rather, is also really interesting because it means you're basically just able to extract quantity from wherever you need to, and you can either play the game yourself and vendor shuffle things from MKM to TCG Player or vice versa, or just extract from both marketplaces and create a run if that's what you want to do, if you're in the mood for it, because quantity is super low, or not, and just wait for it to dry over time, because this is not a card that is in high quantity in good condition seemingly anywhere outside of TCG Player, and even then there's a whole 27 copies that are LP plus.
Yeah, there's not a lot there, so it's a pretty decent opportunity to work with some friends and just move it.
Yeah. Like I said, even overall, just sitting on it for a while if you want, also perfectly fine too. With the awkward difference between market and average almost being a double up, and CK buying at average, it speaks volumes about the fact that you're going to be able to move this thing quickly, but in the short term, if you're able to get in under $10 or so, and that is immediately an option. Even going so far as to buy at up to $9 on TCG Player, that gets you 7 copies you can just ship straight to CK for immediate profit.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this is a great quick flip, or a great long-term hold. No matter what, I don't think you'll lose on this card. I'm going in another direction. I'm going with a Planeswalker that I've been watching forever this week, and a Planeswalker I played in Standard. So I'm going with Garruk Primal Hunter, specifically from M12, just because it's the first set it was in. It's the M12 and M13. It's same cards, same art, no change in the frame, but I just like going with the original when possible. That was all glare. I've got no idea what you held up.
Oh, the Garruk Primal Hunter I have signed by Cassius Mars, Mr. Foil King.
Fair enough.
From M12.
Yep. So the stocks graph tells an interesting story of the reprint in the 2019 Commander set that just causes a plummet, but I'll speak to that and why this pick has been sitting on my list for almost a year in a minute. So initially, Card Kingdom was buying 24 at $2.25. There were 219 copies of this on TCG Player, LP or better, for $2.21. As of adding this to the show notes on Friday, Card Kingdom is buying 17 at $1.50. They're currently buying 21 at $1.50, so that's a 75-cent drop in price overall, but quantity buying stays about the same after the weekend. TCG Player, quantity drops from 219 at 221 to 145 at 244, so there's demand for this card finally. That's why it's been sitting on my list. So this card, highly playable in any green deck that wants to go big. Make tokens or play off the cards in hand, as the -3 to draw is incredibly real. So Garruk comes down as a 5 CMC Planeswalker, loyalty 3, +1 to make a 3/3 beast, -3 to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. And if you have more than one creature and somebody kills the largest creature you control, or creature with the largest power you control, you still draw the cards, but equal to the power of the next largest creature you control. No matter what, you're getting those. And then Garruk's -6 is you just make a bunch of 6/6 worms equal to the number of lands you control. So it plays this really interesting game across 3 different themes in green that are fairly well represented. I'll bring this up on rec right now. The newest toy it got is Vorinclex. Not as a commander, just in the 99. And when you look at commanders, you see pretty quickly exactly what I'm talking about. You have Multani up at the top, which is looking at cards in hand. You have Salava, Storev, Gromaha, Galta, all looking at creature power, which makes the draw super live, as well as the +3. And you just keep going down, you just see great green stuff all the way down. Eventually you start branching out into green decks that aren't heavy and just splashable. But you can play this really anywhere you want. 3 green pips on 5, not the hardest. So the dip I mentioned earlier in the stocks graph is where this gets reprinted in the 2019 Commander deck, Primal Genesis, which is a Nea token deck that promotes both the go wide strategy and the go big strategy across the entirety of the 99. So even there, WotC's just feeding you the idea that this is not a one-dimensional planeswalker, and once you dig in, this isn't even really a two-dimensional planeswalker. This guy almost plays 4D chess, right?
Yeah.
Super, super useful. So, format information in regards to EDH, you have Kosama and Vorinclex, which offer new utility, but this can feature prominently in any base green deck that isn't looking to get under its opponents. Remember, this costs 5, and you're just making a 3/3 or drawing cards. This isn't great for something like Toski or any other like small green deck that just wants to punch somebody in the face real quick. It pluses to protect itself or minuses to draw cards, like I mentioned, and it's immediately impactful to the game. It offers a contained threat that, left unchecked, can win the game regardless of what your overall plan is. So that speaks to its Eminent Splash ability. You could be playing, just Sultai Control, and this is a win con on its own after you draw cards. It just does so much and offers so much versatility. So this allows Garruk to flex outside of mono green decks into green slanted lists, as it requires 3 green pips to cast. Like I mentioned, it makes it a little hard, but not difficult in green light decks, but it still maintains both its power and its utility. So the timeline on this, and this is more in depth about the Q3 dip and the lull, right? So we saw Q3, Q4, there was an EDH lull. We've seen this for a while. It's why I've been sitting on some of these cards. We mention it all the time. For whatever reason, there was just this real big stagnation in 2020 Q3 to Q4, and Garruk was impacted by that. We take a look at the stocks graph, and it just ropes forever, despite the fact that the average flexes, but the market just keeps dancing around, right? So it's just steady forever. It just rides this wave, and eventually, bam, reprint. But continued support for green and EDH continues to bring new looks and renewed demand. So we're getting out well ahead of a card that was and is again seeing growth. That's the really important part, was even though the growth is light recently, we're finally starting to see that upward trend. Starting around Ikoria, it's been ticking up ever so slowly. CK Bylus was a lot lower than it is, but it's finally started to trend up. So the open market price has recovered, which is a positive note towards future growth, but the vendor Vilist stagnation points to a longer term hold, and based on the current charts, my expectation is almost a year before we're able to flip for a decent margin. Now that stagnation is kind of past. We're starting to see it increase both in quantity and price, but we're still probably looking about a year because it is a very slow trend overall. So end of the day, it's not a flashy card. It's really just a workhorse, so I don't expect a spike in the short term, but at the same steady growth we have come to expect from these kinds of cards, like I said, about a year.
I think it's interesting, too, that this does, long term, even longer than what you're saying, this is something that's always going to be liquid because it's one of the most green cards I think I've ever seen in the history of Magic. It makes dudes. It draws cards, which green is incidentally good at, and it makes really big dudes.
Yep.
And it's the type of thing that appeals to casual players because it makes big dudes and does a bunch of stuff, and appeals to your more knowledgeable competitive players because it creates so much card advantage just by being on the field. Mm-hmm. And like you said, with more eyes getting on it, and the more that we get help for green, the more dedication for green there gets there, the more Garruk tribal we end up with, because we're at 40 Garruk planeswalkers.
We're at a lot, but
we
finally got Garruk back. We didn't have Garruk for a very long time. Nissa took his place because of the Gatewatch. Remember that too.
Yeah. And I think that this is the type of thing that as we get Garruk back more in the storyline, you're going to have people reaching back further in time to get these. And I think that, obviously we'll see how things go. I wouldn't be too concerned about a reprint from this one outside of a Masters or a Commander set. But even then, looking at the prices of foils on this card, they're not exactly expensive.
No.
So it's something that even if, for me, I'd be fine just picking some of these up to throw in a trade binder that I may sit on for a little bit. And once the card hits $5-10, be like, all right, I'm going to break these out in the trade binder to go on the floor and see what I can do.
Yeah,
time and
absolutely. The last 2 points I want to make on this are actually speaking to something that you said. One is, yes, this is a very, very green card, but I think people were overlooking this for War of the Spark Nissa that basically gave
Yep.
you a mana flare
Yeah.
and allowed you to promote a bigger or faster game by giving you that one-sided mana flare for your forest. So this gets overshadowed pretty quickly. The second point in regards to a reprint is when you look at the Garruk Planeswalkers in particular, by name alone, the Garruk Planeswalkers tell his story.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to want to reprint one of these cards in a core set when you're furthering your story outside of this character, when the naming convention for Primal Hunter was used at a very specific point in time in the story before, is it core 15, where we got the second green-black Apex Predator?
Apex Predator,
Yeah, where Garruk just went AWOL from then on.
Yep.
Garruk's name tells a story, so it's very evocative of a time in the game based on lore, and they're not super hesitant to do reprints that kind of go against current fluff by re-dredging old fluff, but that does kind of speak against a reprint in a standard set, more towards something in supplemental. I don't know how this card plays in sealed. I wasn't playing sealed at that point in time, but it is amazingly constructed and probably not terrible in a Masters draft, and definitely great for an EDH product. But the next time we get a reprint on this card, if demand kind of continues the way I see it going, and in the time since that dip, we've had some great support for green.
Yeah.
It kind of speaks that this card will be buoyed just based on how good it actually is, and people will start to recognize that as they're digging through EDH cards, digging for EDH cards, and looking at, okay, if I want to go big in hand, what are my best options? If I want to go wide, is there a Planeswalker that helps me do that? If I just want to make tokens and ensure that I have a threat after a creature board wipe, what can I do?
Yeah.
And Garruk fits into so many game plans that I expect this demand helps breed new demand by updating rec, adding to rec, getting more content out there. People can come back and see this card and push it. So.
Yeah, I think it's a really solid choice. There's a lot of upside to it. And, you know, it goes back to the casual EDH thing, that there's always liquidity there. You're never going to not be able to get rid of the card.
Yep.
So
exactly.
Don't have to worry about getting stuck with it.
Nope. It's not a Planeswalker I mind having in my collection, and not a Planeswalker I mind picking up at any point in time. So
yeah.
Anything else on picks or sets this week?
Nope, I think that about covers it for me.
All right, so I think that's going to be it for this week. Thank you for listening. You can find MTG Cabalcast on Twitter at MTG Cabalcast. We are also on Patreon, Facebook, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, at MTG Cabalcast there. I am at Haldiam Reptar on Twitter. You are...
At Thirsty Sizzler.
I forgot something, but we'll see you next week.